Having a sense of oneself is perhaps the most fundamental of all human experiences. The self is our experience of a distinct, real, personal identity that is separate and different from all other people. We can be proud of ourselves, lose control of ourselves, or want to change ourselves, suggesting that we have the ability to think about ourselves as if we were more than just one being and to see ourselves from the vantage point of an observer. Our thoughts and feelings emanate from and toward ourselves. This is in effect how we become to know ourselves. But just where does this sense of self come from? How do we arrive at self-knowledge? When sociologists address these questions, they look at both the individual and society to find the answer. They believe that the self is created and modified through social interaction over the course of a lifetime. But while sociologists agree that the self is largely a social product, there is still a number of theories about how the self develops. Charles Cooley, an early member of the Chicago School of Sociology, devised a simple but elegant way to conceptualize how individuals gain a sense of self. Cooley referred to this concept as the looking glass self. He believed that we all act like mirrors to each other, reflecting back on one another an image of ourselves. We do this in 3 steps. First, we imagine how we look to others, not just in a physical sense, but in how we present ourselves. For example, we may imagine that others find us friendly, funny, or hardworking. And the idea we have of ourselves is particularly important in regard to significant others. Whether they are bosses, parents, friends, or partners, we care about how we look to these people. Second, we imagine our other people's judgment of us. We try to picture others' reactions and to interpret what they must be feeling. What is their opinion of me? Do they think I'm smart enough? Do they think I'm lazy? Do they think I'm boring? Do they think I'm too tall? And then third, we experience some kind of feeling about ourselves based on our perception of other people's judgments. If we imagine, for instance, that they think of us as competent, we may feel pride. Conversely, if we think they consider us inadequate, we may feel shame or embarrassment. The important point here is that we respond to the judgments that we believe others are making about us, without really knowing for sure what they think. And we're not always right. We may draw wildly unrealistic conclusions. But according to Cooley, it is these perceptions, not reality, that determine the feelings we ultimately have about ourselves. The social looking glass self, the way we see ourselves reflected back from others, together with the feelings we develop as a result of what we imagine they see in us, forms our concept of self. For Cooley, there could be no sense of self without society, for there is no individual self without a corresponding other to provide us with our looking glass self-image. The suggestion that we are dependent on what others think of us, or rather what we think they think, for our own self-concept might seem appalling. Are we really that hung up on what other people think? But while some of us may be influenced to a greater or lesser degree, all of us come to know ourselves through relationships, either real or imagined, with others. Another member of the Chicago School, George Herbert Mead, expanded on Cooley's ideas about the development of the self and laid the essential groundwork that became the theory of symbolic interactionism. Mead also believed that the self is created through social interaction. He believed that this process starts in childhood, that children begin to develop a sense of self at about the same time that they begin to learn language. The acquisition of language skills coincides with the growth of mental capacities, including the ability to think of ourselves as separate and distinct and to see ourselves in relationships towards others. According to Mead, the development of the self unfolds in several stages as we move through childhood. First is the preparatory stage. Children under the age of 3 lack a completely developed sense of self, and so they have difficulty distinguishing themselves from others. Such children begin the development process by simply imitating or mimicking others around them, like making faces or playing patty cake, without fully understanding the meaning of their behavior. After age 3, children enter the play stage of development, when they start to pretend or play at being mommy, firefighter, princess, or doctor. This is referred to as taking the role of the significant other. As children learn the behavior associated with being a mother or doctor, they internalize the expectations of those particular others and begin to gain new perspectives in addition to their own. Such play also serves the purpose of anticipatory socialization for the real-life roles a child might play in the future. In the final or game stage of development, children's self-awareness increases through a process Mead described using the example of games. By the early school years, children begin to take part in organized games. Each child must follow the rules of the game, which means that he or she must simultaneously take into account the roles of all the other players. Mead calls this overview of the perspective of the generalized other. So children begin to understand the sets of standards common to a social group, their playmates, and to see themselves from other people's viewpoints. By taking the perspective of the generalized other, children are able to see themselves as objects. They gradually learn to internalize the expectations of the generalized other for themselves and to evaluate their own behavior. This is the beginning of understanding the attitudes and expectations of society as a whole.